All right, let's dive into a nearly 2,000-year-old logic puzzle straight from the Talmud. And trust me, this is basically a detective story about trust, community, food, and yeah, a very sharp knife.
I mean, think about it. It's a question we deal with all the time, right? When you go out to eat or when a friend brings over some food, you're putting your trust in their hands, in their whole process. Well, this ancient text is tackling that exact problem, but with some incredibly high stakes tied to religious law. Okay, so to really get what's going on here, we need to meet the key players. First up, the Samaritans, or Kutimim, as they're called in the text. Now, this was a community with super deep roots in the same biblical traditions as the Jews. But, and this is a big but, they had their own interpretations. This created a really complex and often pretty tense relationship between the two groups.
And the whole issue really hinges on this: kosher slaughter, or shahida. This is not just any old way of preparing meat, no way. It's a precise, religiously mandated process with a whole bunch of very specific rules. If you get it right, the meat is permissible, but if you get it wrong, that meat is completely forbidden. So the stakes are really high.
So let's set the stage. We've got our kosher question, and we're starting with some pretty clear basic rules of engagement. The text kicks things off with a baseline principle that sounds pretty straightforward. If a Jew is right there, physically standing over him and watching the slaughter, then hey, the meat is perfectly kosher. It's that classic idea, right? Trust but verify. But see, that's the easy part. The real puzzle, the place where the detective work really begins, is right here. What if you're not there to watch? You show up and the Samaritan has already slaughtered the animal. How in the world can you know if it was done the right way?
And this is where the ancient rabbis get, they get really clever. They don't just guess or throw up their hands. Instead, they come up with this practical, almost psychological test to figure out if they can trust the guy after the fact. It's called the olive bulk test, and its genius is really in how simple it is. The Jew just cuts off a small olive-sized piece of the meat and offers it to the Samaritan. If the Samaritan eats it, he's basically vouching for his own work. He's saying, yeah, I did this properly, and I'll prove it by eating it myself. And just like that, the meat is considered kosher. But if he refuses, well, you know something's up, and the meat is forbidden. But of course, with any good law, the real action is in the details. This simple little test kicks off a fascinating debate between two major scholars over what supervision actually means. So, on one side you have Abaye. He's the strict, letter-of-the-law guy. He looks at that first rule, standing over him, and says it means exactly that: constant supervision. If the Jew just pops in and out for a second, nope, not good enough. You've got to do the test. But on the other side is Rava. He focuses on the part about the test, and he argues no, that's only for when you show up completely late. For Rava, if you were there and just exit and enter, that's good enough. The trust holds. So the real question is, does trust need constant vigilance, or can it survive a moment of separation? Okay, so they've hashed out the rules for a single animal, but now the rabbis do what they do best. They make the problem harder to see if their logic still holds up. So imagine this. You don't find one animal. You find a whole string of slaughtered birds. All of a sudden, the scale of the problem just got a lot bigger, and so did the risk. And here's the real catch. You can't just apply that simple test over and over again. Asking the Samaritan to eat a piece from every single bird, that's just not practical. The test has to be efficient. So how can one single action prove that the entire batch is good to go? It's a great little quality control problem. And the solution they come up with is it's brilliant. It's basically a legal sting operation. The Jew secretly takes a head from one of the birds. Then he hides the rest of the string so the Samaritan has no clue which one it came from. He crushes the head so it's unrecognizable and offers that to the Samaritan. Because the Samaritan can't possibly know which bird it's from, if he eats it, he's making a huge statement. He's saying he's confident all the birds were slaughtered correctly. He can't cheat because he can't risk accidentally eating a non-kosher bird himself. But just when you think they've found the perfect, foolproof solution, the Talmud just pulls the rug out from under the entire argument. It raises this one devastating question that challenges the entire foundation of the test. And this is a total game changer. What if the Samaritan eats the bird's head, not because he knows it's kosher, but because, according to his interpretation of the Torah, birds don't even need this specific kind of slaughter to begin with? If that's true, then him eating it proves absolutely nothing about his process. The entire test would be completely meaningless. This huge challenge pushes the conversation way beyond just a specific legal case. It gets right to the heart of the matter. What is the fundamental nature of how Samaritans practice their religion, and can you ever really trust it?
And that leads us to this stunning, totally counterintuitive statement from a sage named Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel. He says that for any commandment the Samaritans do choose to accept, they perform it with more precision, that they are more exacting in how they observe it than even the Jews are. I mean, this just completely reframes the whole debate.
So we end up with these two powerful and totally opposite viewpoints on what trust is all about. You have Rabbi Elazar, who basically says Samaritans aren't experts in all the fine details, so he wouldn't trust their matzah for Passover. He sees them as less reliable. But Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel argues the complete opposite. For the laws they do keep, their meticulousness makes them more reliable, and he would totally permit their matzah. And this chart here, it breaks down that nuance perfectly. For the first Tana, the first opinion, if a law is written down in the Torah, you can trust a Samaritan to do it. Simple. But for Rabban Shimon, it's not about what's written down, it's about what's embraced. He would trust a Samaritan on a commandment they passionately practice, even if it's not written. But he would not trust them on a written one they don't seem to really care about. For him, observable commitment is the ultimate basis for trust. And this brings us right to the core tension of this entire ancient debate. And really, it's a question we still wrestle with all the time. Where do you place your trust? In someone who meticulously follows the written rules, the letter of the law, or in someone who passionately embraces the spirit of a tradition? So, we'll leave you with this to think about. When another community is described as being more exacting in a tradition that you both share, does that create a foundation for trust, a kind of bridge between you? Or does that very difference in practice, that intensity, end up creating a distance that's just impossible to cross? It's a timeless question about community, identity, and what trust really means.